In Canada right now, half a dozen or so Catholic churches have been burned to the ground in response to the recent revelations of residential schools. So what are people supposed to make of this, and what are Catholics supposed to be feeling towards this? I've had so many Catholics reach out and express that they don't know how to communicate about this issue publicly. They don't know what to say. If you are not familiar with residential schools in Canada, I want to invite you just to take a couple of minutes to learn about the Indian Act, learn about the Catholic Church's role in the operation of these residential schools, and some of the atrocities that have been committed across history. In response to some of the most recent revelations of the supposed graves being discovered at some of these residential schools, Catholic churches are being burnt to the ground in intentional acts of arson. Now, I've heard lots of Catholics expressing a whirlwind of emotions, not really knowing how they're supposed to feel, how they're supposed to react, what they're supposed to say, or how even to communicate this in the public forum. Many have expressed confusion and even hesitation, not knowing how to respond. And precisely this, is what this video is about. First, before I continue, I just want to share a precursor with you that I have a deep love and respect for the Indigenous community. I've had the privilege of being invited to be able to spend time with them, to be able to minister to them, to hear their stories, to hear their hurt and their brokenness, but also their triumphs of healing and restoration, and to witness their wisdom. I have friends and family members who are of the Indigenous community, and hearing of the atrocities committed across the ages makes my heart ache for them. I have heard the stories of victims, and I hate that they were hurt in this way. These atrocities, these terrible acts, they cannot be condoned. They cannot be justified. And those who were involved need to be held responsible. However, we see right now, in response to all of this hurt, that Catholic churches are being burnt to the ground. So how are we to feel about this? Firstly, as Catholics, I think we need to be more vocal about this. We need to acknowledge the wrongs that have been done in the past. It's not okay to just try and ignore it, to be silent on it. The Church has made acknowledgements of this as well. Like the bishops of the territories of these residential schools, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, even popes have acknowledged the wrongdoings, have owned and taken responsibility for this. And this is something that is necessary for us to continue to build upon. Even Pope Benedict XVI offered a formal apology in 2009, which was well received by the Indigenous community here in Canada. And in saying all of that, more will still need to be done. There needs to be a continued building upon the foundation of reconciliation and healing. And just like any other scandal, I'm sure that there will be more facts that are brought to light. And that is actually a good thing. As much as it is embarrassing, as much as it can bring up the trauma all over again, it is important and essential for the truth to be brought to light so that true healing can take place. So please, if you are a Catholic like I am, let's not diminish the terrible atrocities that have happened across the decades. Let's acknowledge them. Let's own them so that we can continue to move forward in that recognition. I very much appreciated the generous words of Chief Cadmus, where he said that nobody today created the Indian Act, and nobody today created the 60s scoop. We've all inherited this. So as Catholics, let's continue to express our sorrow and remorse for these atrocities committed. Let's stand in solidarity with the Indigenous community, and let's continue to encourage the leadership of our church, the bishops and priests, to continue that foundation of reconciliation and healing, to cooperate towards that process of healing. The second thing is that I'm hearing from a lot of non-Catholics a striking silence on behalf of Catholics. They're noticing that Catholics are remaining silent on this issue. And I don't think that's a good thing. There are times when silence can be prudent. Like as an apologist, I like to deal with fact rather than speculation. However, I don't believe that this is one of these times. Regardless of these preliminary reports and these supposed findings, we need to acknowledge that wrong has been done in the past. And so we need to continue to show remorse and sorrow for that, to show sensitivity to the Indigenous community and the victims of these traumas. I don't believe silence in that respect is helpful. Lastly, how are we to be feeling towards churches being burnt to the ground? Obviously, this is a sign of trauma. We don't want to see this happen. And it's unfortunate because these churches, most of them are on Indigenous land and serve the Indigenous community. With over 50% of Indigenous identifying as Christian, the majority of those as Catholic, these acts of arson are actually hurting the Indigenous community even more, because the places where they would go to find comfort and healing are being taken away from them. We should be saddened by these churches being burnt to the ground. And I am so personally grateful to the Indigenous leaders who are calling for these acts of arson to end. I'd like to offer just a really important distinction for us to remember as we move forward in this, is that these atrocities, these heinous acts and crimes were committed by individuals or groups of individuals. And that doesn't diminish the atrocities and the crimes that were committed, because the reality is that those heinous acts go against the very teaching of Catholicism. And I'd like to offer this analogy just to illustrate what I mean. If after 9/11 there was outrage when mosques were vandalized or burnt to the ground in response to the certain acts of individuals who flew planes in the Twin Towers, would it not then follow that we should also be outraged when Catholic churches are being burnt to the ground in response to the acts of individuals who committed these atrocities under the guise of the Catholic faith? I believe we should be able to live in a world, and justice calls us to recognize that we can be saddened and we can mourn the atrocities that happen to a marginalized people, but we can also be saddened and mourn the atrocities that are committed in response to that as well. Can't both of these acts be immoral and unacceptable? Can't I be outraged and mourn for the Indigenous community whom I have grown to love and respect, and also at the same time saddened that these very outposts of hope, these churches, the places where they would go to find comfort and healing, are being taken away from them as they're being burnt to the ground? Can't I be saddened for both? And if I say that I support the Indigenous community, that doesn't necessarily mean that I support retribution. And if I say that I am saddened by these churches being burnt to the ground, it doesn't necessarily mean that I condone these heinous crimes and atrocities that were committed by individuals under the guise of the Catholic faith. I think it's also important for us to recognize that though these heinous crimes were committed on behalf of the Catholic Church, these were the actions of individuals. I want to make it very clear, the Catholic Church teaches that these crimes and these atrocities are not acceptable, that they go against the very teachings of Catholicism itself. I hate the hurt that was caused by these individuals, by these groups of individuals on behalf of the Church. I want to encourage Catholics, let's not remain silent on this any longer. Let's continue to build on that foundation of healing and reconciliation. Let's show our solidarity for the Indigenous community who's hurting with generations of trauma. Let's own and acknowledge that members of our churches have hurt people in the past. Let's not diminish their wrongdoings. I want to invite everyone to do a few simple things with me. The first one is to pray. Let's really pray. Pray that God will work His grace and His mercy through this situation. The second one is let's fast. Let's detach ourselves from the earthly things so that we can appreciate all the more what God has for us spiritually. Let's willfully suffer and offer that as an intention for this very issue that's going on right now. Number 3 is let's listen. Let's listen to the Indigenous community. Let's listen to their hurts and their brokenness, and let's listen to their stories of restoration as well. Let's listen to their wisdom. And the fourth thing is let's act. Let's allow God to stir within us a desire to act, to not be silent, to speak up, that He will give us the words of consolation, that He will give us the actions and the opportunity to be able to show love and to support a community of people who have been marginalized, and how we have inherited generations of that trauma today. Let's demand better from our government. Let's encourage faith leaders to continue to build upon that foundation of healing and reconciliation, to cooperate towards that path of healing. Let's allow this as an opportunity where we be refined, where we can show love and support to those who are in need.
The King is righteousness. I come and I receive the living bread in me. Wash over me, wash over me. God, take this heart, transform